What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Elevate your style in a Cadillac. Go from bold to bolder in an SUV, from inspiring to awe-inspiring in a sedan. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. And here's your reminder to subscribe to the show at Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You could watch on SNY's YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcast. We are live from the Cadillac Club here at Citi Field. I'm your host, Connor Rogers, joined as always by my co-host, Joe DeMayo. And Joe, what's better than this as a new era begins for the New York Mets, because David Stearns will officially be the president of baseball operations. We get to do a live show at our favorite place in Citi Field.
It's fantastic to be here at the Cadillac Club again. And one thing that I will say, and everyone who listens to this show knows, we're not big on using like hyperbolic terms, but this is truly a momentous day in Mets history. And I know some people might roll their eyes, but David Stearns is someone that this ownership group has had their eyes on basically since they purchased the team. And if you read about David Stearns from The Athletic, and other places are writing stories about him over the last day or two, like, this is a guy that is considered throughout league circles as the best, or the 1B to Andrew Friedman of the Dodgers when it comes to executives in the sport. So this is just the culmination of Steve Cohen's vision of having president of baseball operations, general manager. This is exactly what he wanted. And Billy Epler, according to Andy Martino, is going to stay on in his role as GM.
Not too surprising there, right?
Not surprising at all. David Stearns and him have a relationship of some sorts. And David Stearns is now the guy that's going to run the show here, and it's an exciting day for Mets fans.
Listen, we have a lot to get through on today's show. We will be talking much more about David Stearns and, of course, the big league club, the minor league system. We'll continue with the scoreboard. We are live, so send us your questions in those YouTube comments. We will fit them into the show. If you're in the Cadillac Club, we got microphones. Don't be a stranger. Come up and ask those questions. Let's stick with Stearns here, Joe, because you and I, it feels like we've been talking about this guy since we've been podcasting together. Pretty close, at least. Pretty close. It's as close to as official as he can get. We saw Andy Martino report that he can start working for the Mets. I believe October 2nd is the exact date. For those listening and thinking, because for a fan, it's not like signing in Ohtani, or it's not something that you get to see on the field on opening day no matter what, and if they hit a home run, you're convinced this is a new era and you're going to a World Series. It's behind the scenes, and we know how important that is in baseball, building up a farm system, building up everything in the organization. This is as obviously high-level a role as you can get. He is above Billy Epler. He is the president of baseball operations. He will be dealing with the personnel of this team. What is it about Stearns that has given him this insane, in a great way, reputation across all of baseball?
So to start, let's just go through his career timeline. So obviously he went to Harvard. He started as an intern with the Mets, left the Mets, started work for the Cleveland. They were the Indians at the time, but we're going to call them the Guardians for the sake, but worked for the Guardians. And then from there, he went to the Astros to be the assistant GM under Jeff Lunau, led to becoming the general manager of the Milwaukee Brewers at 30 years old. And that's where things are unique. It's not very often, like, those are the special type of executives. Like Theo Epstein, I believe, took over the Red Sox at 29. So the special ones are the ones that could get in at that type of age. And now we're 8 years later. He's 38 years old, joining the Mets. But overall, from what you read and what you hear, he is an excellent trader, despite the Josh Hader thing, but he was even open about that was a misjudgment by me. But a lot of people say he is basically like a master chess player, and he's ready to go head-to-head with anyone. I mean, what do they always say, Connor? Don't trade with the Rays, right? That's one of the most common phrases. And, of course, they gave up Drew Rasmussen, and who's a good arm, but that's where they got Willy Adames, who was floundering with Tampa, but he saw something. He had traded, back in the day, he traded Adam Lind to get a low minors pitcher named Freddie Peralta, who turned out to be a mid-rotation starter.
Yeah.
So between that, and then he also, obviously, the Harvard education, he brings the IQ to the table. But what a lot of people say is he's the perfect blend of EQ and IQ. Like, he knows how to emotionally relate to people. He's approachable. He's someone that gives autonomy to the people below him. So while he's making the ultimate decision, it's not like a dictatorship per se. He wants to hear the perspective of everyone underneath him. And I will say, drafting, player development, that's something that Milwaukee did a pretty good job of. That's why they were in contention. But I wouldn't say they were top of class in that. But one thing that David Stearns played a huge role in was the development of the pitching lab in Milwaukee, because he got that from Houston. He played a big role in that. Obviously, we've talked about that on this show, and that's something David Stearns' priority, from what I understand and I've read about him, is he wants to build around pitching, and he wants to build around power in the offense. Like, those are his priorities. And, of course, another thing you've seen from Milwaukee over the last handful of years is bullpen. Josh Hader, Devin Williams, Uribe this year. Like, it seems like they're constantly churning out relievers, which is something the Mets have struggled to do. So, overall, you're talking about a guy that I know that I've had some people say to me, really hasn't won a World Series. Well,
it's a tough bar to set.
It's very hard to win a World Series, but Milwaukee had made the playoffs 4 times in their first 47 years of existence. They made it 4 years in a row when David Stearns took over.
That speaks volumes.
That speaks volumes to what he can do, and now you're taking him into a situation where there is a very strong farm system in place, and he has financial backing of ownership. So when he was with Milwaukee, I'm sure there were some big ideas that he had that he wanted to pull off that didn't get signed off on. Here with the Mets, things like that can get signed off on.
I think that's what's most exciting to me, is that he goes into a situation where you look at the assets that he has,
Yes.
right? This is a rebuilt farm system. A lot of that thanks to the most recent trade deadline, but also some young players that were drafted by this franchise. But also, Joe, the financial flexibility and the financial power to go out and get a big free agent that he deems worth paying, or go out, how about this, eat up the mid-tier market, something we've talked about time and time again. It's not always about landing a guy that was a top 3 free agent for a $300 million deal. Sometimes it's about going out and getting those guys that sign the 1-year $7 million deal, the 2-year $30 million deal, guys like that fill out a roster that could be bounce-back candidates, that could be analytics darlings. He sees something in them that you can get the most out of them on a short-term window.
And that's, if I were in charge and interviewing, I'd be like, what you did in Milwaukee on the mid-tier market, like, we want you to do that here too, but we'll also give you the opportunity when the right thing is there. If you want to spend $200 million on a certain player, we have the financial flexibility to do that. So, obviously, like I said, just a massive day that it's pretty funny. I don't know if it was because of the Aaron Rodgers news, or if it was because we've talked about David Stearns potentially coming to the Mets for, like you said, years, or a combination of the two, but it felt like a massive move, just like fell under the radar.
Shrugged.
Just kind of shrugged, but I don't want it to be downplayed at all, and I want Met fans to realize that, like you said, Connor, it's not like he's going to be playing right field on opening day, but he's going to play a huge role in the Mets organizational plan for not just being successful in 2024, but to have that sustained success. And I know it's cliche and it feels like company line, but that's genuinely what the Mets are seeking. And I think David Stearns is arguably the best possible person they could have hired to lead them in that direction.
So we got a question on Twitter before this show from Condi, who said David Stearns is reportedly interested in power and pitching. That's something that you alluded to earlier too, Joe. Condi asked, how is he going to add either one to the lineup for next year? And while we can revisit a lot of different names, and we will get to a name that's not on the Mets in just a bit, I think this conversation starts with somebody that is on the Mets right now, and that's Pete Alonso, because adding power and pitching is great, but having it already in your system and keeping it is just as important. And we know, Joe, we've discussed the rumors time and time again. We've heard everything about Pete Alonso. He's not a free agent after this year. Pete Alonso is under team control for 2024. What happens beyond that is a big mystery. But to me, when I read something like that, and it's a great question from Condi, I think David Stearns getting here, why would he be in any kind of rush to trade the Mets' best source of power, one of the best sources of power in all of baseball, in Pete Alonso?
I mean, since Pete Alonso's been in the major leagues, he has the most home runs of anyone in the major leagues. So he is,
it's a fact,
by definition, like the best power hitter in baseball. So my thought is, I think he will do the same due diligence that the Mets did at the trade deadline. Like, I think it was a bit of a misconception. I don't think the Mets were shopping Pete Alonso at the trade deadline. But if your phone rings, it's irresponsible to not answer it. But my expectation would be Pete Alonso is with the Mets in 2024. I would expect he'll be with the Mets beyond 2024. I just don't see that resolution coming before free agency. Like, I think right now, the way that it's being looked at, I think Pete Alonso and his camp would like to be paid more closer to Aaron Judge money, whereas organizationally, and you can't really like completely blow up the first base market. Like
Freddie
Freeman right now is the highest paid first baseman on an average basis of $26 million. So, yes, do I think Pete Alonso should be the highest paid first baseman? Of course. Do I think he will ultimately be that with the Mets? I do. But he's not going to get $40 million a year.
It's not the first base market. It doesn't exist.
So he is a year plus from free agency, so he has the right to ask for whatever he wants. Maybe spring training time, they have more serious conversations. But my thought right now is I would expect Pete Alonso to go to free agency. And we have said this on the show a couple times, and I don't mind repeating it. If Aaron Judge can go to free agency and return to the Yankees, Pete Alonso can go to free agency and return to the Mets.
That's right. If you're at a point of negotiations where you can't find that middle point, right, and you have the financial power of the Mets where any offer can come back to you and you could top it, right? I mean, let's be realistic.
If he wants to.
We just witnessed this with Brandon Nimmo, by the way. That's why this isn't foreign territory where it's like you can't let him go out there. What if he signs and takes a deal and you don't get him back? Well, the Mets have been through this before. A lot of good organizations do that because you can't go out and reset the market, like you said, go from $26 million as the highest paid first baseman to $40. Yeah. But you can let him go find a $30 million a year deal and say, hey, we'll give you 31, 32.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, and to be fair to David Stearns, he hasn't been privy or in any of these negotiations as far as they've gone between the Mets and Alonso's camp. Now he will be. Now he'll give his input. And, I mean, the type of professional he is and the type of experience he has in this area kind of gives you a little bit more confidence. Nothing against Billy Epler, he gets a tough reputation from the fans that we think is a little unfair at times.
Epler gets way more grief than it warrants.
Right.
Like, look, did paying down the salaries help at the trade deadline? Absolutely. But you still have to negotiate the return. Steve Cohen's not negotiating. He doesn't know. I mean, I doubt Steve Cohen knew much about Drew Gilbert when the Mets were talking to Houston about Justin Verlander.
He's not grinding minor league tape.
And if you look at, and even if you go back, as bad as this season has been, if you go back and look at last offseason, how much would you have done differently than the Mets did? Like, okay, you should have added another reliever or two, but I would have signed Justin Verlander. We talked about it. We were at the Queens Baseball Convention, and we said, if Jacob deGrom wants to leave, sign Justin Verlander. Problem solved. And it just didn't work out this year, but I think Billy Epler is a fine GM, and I think he's going to add value, maybe even a little more value by being the second guy that maybe he'll handle some of the day-to-day stuff, and David Stearns will have the more big-picture look. But I think it's setting up to be a very well set up front office.
And we know Epler's influence and experience in the Asian baseball market, too, which we will get to a little bit more, as we always do, as we talk about Yoshinobu Yamamoto. We'll get there in a second, but before we do, we have to get into Ronny Mauricio on this show. I mean, as we sit here, right above us is where he launched his first career home run on Monday night. Ronny Mauricio has now had a hit in 8 of his 10 games in his career in the major leagues. 3 of those 8 have been multi-hit games. Joe, the thing that surprises me, 4 steals in those 10 games. I mean, you've watched Mauricio basically since he was an international free agent signing as a 16-year-old with a massive bonus. He was a 150-pound kid. Now you see him at Citi Field launching home runs, multi-hit games. It's been an incredible start for Mauricio in a Mets uniform.
I mean, honestly, it couldn't have gone much better because we've seen Francisco Alvarez struggle out of the gate when he first got called up. We've seen Brett Baty struggle initially and then obviously even has struggled since he came back up. Ronny seems to have hit the ground running. And one thing that he does is he hits the baseball really hard. That home run, his first home run, went 440 feet at 112 miles an hour. That's what Pete Alonso does. That's what Shohei Ohtani and Aaron Judge and Giancarlo Stanton, like you think of the guys that hit the ball really hard. Like Ronny Mauricio's in that caliber as far as being able to barrel up a ball. He's not drawing walks here, obviously. And that
didn't do much in the minors.
He never did that. And frankly, respectfully, he's probably never going to. But I think what is going to be big is if he could hit for average and hit for power and throw in some of those steals. Like, I think he stole over 20 bases in AAA this year. So does he have 20 stolen base potential at the next level? I don't see why not. 4 so far in just, 10 games you said? 4 in 10 games? So, like, that's, especially with the modern rules, like, could he be a 20-20 guy? Sure, I don't see why not. But the key is going to be for him, there's average, there's on base, there's power. You need to have 2 of the 3. So if you want to be an everyday player, you can't hit 210 with a 270 on base and hit 20 homers and be an every single day player. But overall, he's looked fine at second base, which has been honestly a pleasant surprise because in the minors, in AAA this year when he played second base, the results were not fantastic. They put him in left field because second base wasn't going well.
A lot of errors.
But he's looked very comfortable out there, so I don't know if it was a combination of, I don't want to say boredom, but kind of plateauing at AAA and being kind of over it, and now he's at the major leagues and he's rejuvenated. But Ronny Mauricio is shaping up as a guy that at one point was the best prospect in the Mets system. Then his stock just fell off, and people just didn't think he was going to be a big leaguer. And now he's a guy that it'd be hard-pressed to not call him an everyday player for the 2024 Mets.
And I think back to your point, Joe, about him kind of, plateauing and maybe losing some of that juice in the minors. Some guys get up here in the big leagues and the lights can be too bright. Some guys get up here in the big leagues and they thrive off of that adrenaline. And I think while Brett Baty and Mark Vientos have mostly struggled at the big league level, you've seen Ronny Mauricio and now and also Francisco Alvarez kind of feed off that energy. You saw the bat flip from Mauricio. Some guys, it's cliche, but when you think the term big leaguer, some guys just kind of have a different vibe to them when they're in the big league park. And Mauricio has not looked overmatched at all at the plate. And like you said, Joe, the exit velocities that he's already posted in such a short time, I think is actually something that it would, in my opinion, be sustainable, right?
Yeah, that's one of the measures that analytics departments use, and they have things that are way smarter than exit velocity. Like they don't just use like Baseball Savant, but Ronnie, like exit velocity is one of the things that translates. Like that is barrel control and being able to hit a baseball hard. That's strong wrists, that's strong forearms. Those are things that are going to carry over. And, it clearly has through, obviously a small sample size, but through 10 games, Ronnie is hitting the ball just as hard as he did in AAA.
All right, so we hinted at this before. Yoshinobu Yamamoto, a favorite on this podcast that's not even in a Mets uniform yet, we hope. Listen, second career no-hitter. We heard that Brian Cashman was in attendance.
Yeah.
This is somebody that everyone knows. The secret's out. He's on the Mets' radar. He's been on the Mets' radar. This is a 25-year-old, I don't want to say phenom, but an incredible talent overseas. The second career no-hitter. He'll get a massive payday in this free agent market. It's going to be crowded. And I think another thing to it is, Joe, in America, in the big leagues, so many of these guys get to free agent as pitchers as 29, 30, 31, 32 years old. The fact that this is a player that might be entering his prime, and I think it helps, Joe, that the Mets just had a massive success story in Kodai Senga coming over here and being, honestly, way better than anybody even expected. Because if they expected this, he would have got $25 million a year, not $15 million per year. When you look at Yamamoto, number one, what kind of contract are we talking about? And do you think this is going to turn into a free agent frenzy because of the level of talent he is at the age he is?
I think the combination of level of talent, age, and we always talk about the qualifying offer, the draft pick compensation. He doesn't come with any of that. So teams are going to say, well, there is obviously some inherent risk because, look, there's been people that have come over from Japan that got good money and weren't good and vice versa. But dude, you want to pay Blake Snell $250 million and also lose a high pick and deal with everything that comes along with Blake Snell? Or do you want to look at a guy like Yoshinobu Yamamoto who, I think the baseline number is Masahiro Tanaka's 7-year, $155 million contract. I don't think it could be anything less than that. And to be honest with you, given the market, it could get up to $200 million. And I don't think that means there's not going to be a ton of teams involved in the form of quantity because how many teams are issuing $200 million contracts nowadays?
With a risky signing.
With a risky signing. But it's going to be very aggressive big market teams. That's what it comes down to. And I think the Mets are going to be heavily involved. And if you look at Yamamoto compared to Senga coming over, it's not even close. Yamamoto's a significantly better prospect than Senga was coming over, and Senga has translated so well, and credit goes to the Mets for helping him become the pitcher that he was.
He's been vocal about that, too.
For sure. So Yamamoto's the kind of guy that even if the Mets are going to be a little less aggressive than they have been this offseason, if they're looking at 2024 as maybe we're not, gun-ho, like we are building a team to win a World Series in spring training expectations. Yamamoto's a guy that the first year could be a transitional year for him too. Like Senga's optimal. What happened with Senga doesn't often happen. But you could have him adjust to American culture, the baseball, the slope, and, of course, you're going to have to adjust your rotation, whether that means going to a 6-man rotation full time, because if Senga needs to stay on the same schedule, or you treat him just like you treated Senga. So I expect the Mets to be heavily involved on Yamamoto, and that contract could get upwards of $200 million.
I think part of the reason we're so fascinated by his free agency is not only the talent, but notably the age, because I think it was misconstrued when people said that the Mets wouldn't be involved in the offseason. I think the Mets are maybe done trying to get the Band-Aid guys that cost $40 million a year that, hey, you can maybe win a World Series this year, but eventually that's going to fall off a cliff. Yamamoto is kind of a guy that you can call a foundational piece.
For sure.
Where you're looking at year 2, year 3, year 4, this guy might be at his best. And that's
he
the
may
best
get even better. Exactly.
It might get better, exactly, which we think could even happen with Kodai Senga.
For sure.
Well.
I mean, Senga's obviously a little older than Yamamoto is, but I don't know that we've seen the best that Kodai Senga has to offer either. You're seeing him. What was big for me with Senga is locating the fastball vertically.
Right.
He's elevating properly, and now you're starting to see him start to dot some fastballs lower in the zone, and having that makes the ghost fork even more electric. Because if you can't locate the fastball down, then anything that's kind of trending down, hitters will eventually just spit
on, right?
So big improvement for Senga.
All right, so let's go down on the farm. We'll take a step away from the Major League team for now. As we always do, this is our rapid fire for the players in the minor league system. And let's put a bow on Ryan Clifford's season. As the A-ball season in Brooklyn is over, Clifford came over, obviously, as the second piece in the Justin Verlander trade. Joe, we got to see the light tower power. Yeah. We also got to see some of the swing and miss. Ryan Clifford is a really big dude that can put the ball over the fence. What did you think of the short time we got to see him within the Mets system?
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about the guys that the Mets traded for, so, we talk about Drew Gilbert or whatever, we're talking about a 30-game sample size. But Ryan Clifford has the best raw power in the Mets farm system. There's no way around it. I mean, it's talking to some scouts. They said he's 65 grade power, which for those that don't know, the scouting scale is 20 to 80. 65, you're looking at 25, 30 home run type of power. The problem is his strikeout rate for the Mets significantly higher than what it was in the Astros organization. I believe it was around a 37% strikeout rate with the Mets organization, and that is clearly not a sustainable number. So he needs to make better contact, more consistent contact. Doing that is what will lead to getting into that big power. He played some first base, played some corner outfield. I think defensively he best fits as a first baseman. But he has certainly played some corner outfield, and I think the Mets will continue that in 2024. And we'll see where he starts. It's very possible at his age, he's a 20-year-old player, it's very possible they'll let him start in Brooklyn again. And they've done that before with guys like Alex Ramirez and other players where you had them repeat high A, let them beat up high A early in the season, then move on up to double A. But Ryan Clifford's a guy certainly to keep an eye on, and the power is definitely going to be his main selling point.
So Binghamton's season will continue.
Yes.
They will be starting the playoffs next Thursday, I believe, as we sit here and record the week before. But Drew Gilbert, Luisangel Acuna, and Blade Tidwell, I mean, we've seen flashes from all of them, Joe, and we know Gilbert got especially hot in recent weeks.
I mean, Drew Gilbert's just hit since he's been with the Mets. He's been fantastic. He's hitting the ball hard. You're seeing him play center field. He's played some left field, so they're testing his defensive versatility. I believe he has the arm to play right field if you want him to. But Drew Gilbert's been one of the better players in the minor leagues this year. When you just take out, there was a certain period of time in around May, I believe, that he was kind of playing through a bit of an injury, and he had a really tough stretch. But once he kind of got past that, Drew Gilbert's been money. And ever since he's come here, it's like he's hit the ground running, whereas a guy like Luisangel Acuna took a bit of an adjustment time. He was not hitting well early on in his Mets tenure, but he's made improvements. He's starting to hit the ball, hit line drives, hit a couple home runs. Not that power is going to be a huge part of his game, but with a guy with his speed, you want to see it turn into gap-to-gap line drive power. You want to see him get those doubles, get those triples, be someone who could be dynamic on the base pass instead of like a slap singles hitter. So he's making some strides, and Blade Tidwell, it's been up and down for him a little bit this year in Double A. It's basically what it comes down to with Tidwell is if he throws strikes, he's awesome. If he doesn't, he's not, which is kind of simplistic, but in his last start on Tuesday for Binghamton, he threw 5 shutout, didn't walk a batter, 9 strikeouts. So Blade Tidwell is, for me, the Mets' top pitching prospect, and he's a guy that I think will probably start with Double-A again next year, but he's someone, as you look to the second half of the 2024 season, he could be someone that could be looked at as a potential rotation piece for this team.
And that takes us to a new face in Binghamton and Jett Williams, who, I mean, Joe, if I told you before the season, hey, Jett Williams is going to finish the season in Binghamton, you would have been like, okay, sure, Connor, especially at his age, where he was at. Jett Williams made his debut for Binghamton on Monday night. No surprise, Joe. 2 for 4 with a double. Also got hit by a pitch, so the OBP stays way up, scores 3 runs. I mean, this kid just makes things happen. It doesn't matter what level he's playing at. It feels like this is just who Jett Williams is at this point.
I've been the high person on Jett Williams dating back to the MLB draft last year. Like, when the Mets took him, there was a lot of people that thought he didn't warrant that pick, and I was excited when the Mets made it. And as optimistic as I am about him, you could not have convinced me he'd be in Double-A in his first pro season. So it's just a huge shout-out to the player development staff and to him for the work that he's put in. He's a very hard-working kid, and like you said, it's just hitting the ground running. He had a little bit of a tough start in St. Lucie to start his big league career. Geez, I'm already getting ahead of myself. But
next year.
Start his professional career, and then pick that up, start hitting in addition to drawing walks and getting on base, because that's what it was early on. It was he would draw the walks, but he wasn't hitting. And then he started to hit, got the promotion to Brooklyn, hit and walk there, hit for power in Brooklyn. I think he had 7 home runs in 35 games. And now getting that taste of Double-A is an exciting thing, because that's where he's going to start next year. And now he could go through a playoff run with them. And Jett Williams is a guy that I have number 2 in the system. I think you're going to see a lot of people that weren't giving Jett Williams the respect that he warranted over the last few months, ranking him 5th in the system, 6th in the system. You've seen like him kind of vary in that. I think this time, when we report the spring training and all the sites and everyone update their top 30 lists and their top 100 lists, Jett Williams stock up, and I think that you're going to see him number 1 in a lot of for a lot of people, number 1 in the Mets system, and he's a guy that could be a top 10 prospect in baseball, and I try not to be overly hyped, but like the way he's playing is not something that frequently happens. I think I said this on Mets Off Day Live last week, but Jett Williams at 19 years old played his first game for Double-A. The last time a Mets prospect at 19 years old appeared in a Double-A game was Andres Jimenez in 2018. So it's been a minute, and it's not something that we should take too lightly.
And what a debut it was for Jett Williams, who is absolutely one of our favorites on this show. And it'll be crazy to watch his progress. All right, we got a question here. This is from Jose Arroyo on Facebook. He said, do you think the Mets trade Brett Baty or Mark Vientos? I'm assuming this is heading towards this offseason. It's kind of a good time for that question because we just talked about how loaded this farm system is. And we've seen not enough of these guys, but we've seen some where you said it perfectly when we were off the air, Joe. You said you can't write in ink that they're starters going into next year. Maybe for Baty it's in pencil right now. So you're not completely giving up on them. But, man, it just feels like it's rare that there are guys in the system coming up that could make a push and ultimately push some people out of the picture.
I think it's possible down the road, but I'm certainly not saying Brett Baty had a bad rookie year. We're trading him away.
Sell low.
Yeah, you're selling low 1 and 2. Like, what are you selling him and then saying, well, in a year or two, Luisangel Acuna is going to be the second baseman, which means Ronny Mauricio needs to play third. These things always work themselves out. We say that all the time on this show. And one thing that David Stearns values is he wants to maximize his 40-man roster, which I know fans care about the 26-man roster, a team that's on the field at Citi Field every night. But if you don't have a strong 40-man roster, you're not going to have a strong season. So I don't think you're rushing either of those guys out the door. But to your point, Connor, I would say right now you don't want to put either of their names in pen as someone that's going to be in the 2024 Mets lineup. But Brett Baty and Mark Vientos should be able to come to spring training and have the opportunity to compete for their job. Because I think with Jeff McNeil's flexibility and potentially Ronny Mauricio's flexibility defensively, that could give you options. And those guys have minor league options too. So if Brett Baty goes and has a so-so spring and it's not the time to keep playing him at third, you could put him in AAA.
Right.
Like, you have those options. So I wouldn't rush them out the door, but maybe that's a down-the-road discussion.
You're listening to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SNY's YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, time to update our scoreboard standings here, Joe. This is from last week. Over-under push was set at 5 for Ronny Mauricio hits in the next 7 Mets games. Joe, you went over. I went with the push. Of course, Mauricio had 6 hits, and you get the point by 1 hit. It never fails. Over-under push was set at 2 for Ronny Mauricio steals in the next 7 Mets games. We both went under. Mauricio had 2. No points for either of us. Mauricio's running at the major league level has been not a shocking development, but a nice, pleasant surprise. 4 steals in 10 games. Over-under push set at 7 for Max Scherzer, Justin Verlander. Combined earned runs allowed on Wednesday when they face each other.
We were live texting this one.
Joe, we were a rare American League game that I had to have my eyes on. Joe, you went under. I went over. They gave up 8 earned runs. It went over. Verlander only gave up 1, but as I said when I made this prediction, just takes one of them to implode. Max Scherzer gave up 7. I actually get a point here. Over-under push set at 5 for Drew Gilbert hits in the next 6 Binghamton games. Joe, you called it. He's been scorching. He stays hot. You went with the push, though, and he ends up having 6 instead of 5. I went with the under. I doubted Drew Gilbert. I was wrong.
Never doubt Drew Gilbert.
You were just shy of getting another point there. Over-under push was set at 6 for Jett Williams walks in the next 6 Cyclones games. You went under. I went with the push. He had 5, so he ends up going under. Joe, you were right. Man, you squeaked out a lot of points in this one. Joe,
I told you, Jett Williams is becoming a hitter. He's not just going to be drawing walks. He's becoming a true hitter, too.
Joe win. We got a lot more Jett Williams to the scoreboard this week. Joe wins the week. He's now up 22-19 on the season. I have some ground to make up, and that takes us to this week's edition. It is all Jett Williams. So here we go with our 6 categories.
We have 6 categories on Jett Williams. This is
4. I was originally right.
I was going to say
4 categories on Jett Williams. And here's the tricky thing. He did make that debut we already talked about. So we remind you his stats in that will count for this week. Over-under push is set at 6 for Jett Williams hits in his first 6 Binghamton games. In the 1 game he's already played, he's at 2, Joe. So he's 4 away from our number. Where are you going for Jett Williams?
I'm going to go over. You know what? I think Jett Williams is becoming a true hitter in front of our very eyes. So he's already a third of the way there, and he still has, 5 or 6 games left before we're up. So, yeah, I think he has another multi-hit game or 2 in front of him.
I'm going to go with the over as well, simply because you frame it like this. He's got 5 games to get 5 hits. Yeah. And Jett Williams, it's just playing the numbers at this point. It feels like he could do that. All right, over-under push is set at 4 for his walks in his first 6 Binghamton games. He didn't have any walks in the first game. He got hit by a pitch. So it feels like he probably would have walked at that at bat knowing Jett. Joe, I'm going to go with the push here. I think Jett has 4 walks this week. Where are you going?
I'm going to go under.
Just swinging.
If I say he's swinging. So I'll go under, but he'll walk 3 times. It's not like he's not going to walk. That's part of his game, but I think it'll be under.
The over-under push for the amount of doubles he hits in his first 6 Binghamton games is set at 3, Joe. Are you going over, under, or pushing at 3? He does have 1 double already. 1 double in the books.
I'll go under. I think he will hit 1 more or none, which obviously is the number for an under. But, I think it's maybe he'll mix a triple or 2 in there, maybe a home run.
I'll take the push because I need to make up some ground on you. Yeah. I got to get these 2 more doubles here. I got to make up some ground. It's as simple as that. I might watch as much Jett Williams in Binghamton next week as I watch Mets. Don't tell anyone that sitting here. All right, the last one, over-under push is set at 2 for how many hit by pitches in his first 6. This is just an absolute sick category from our producer, Jeff. Yeah. He has been hit by 1 pitch. He only needs to get hit by 1 more to reach the number 2.
That's it.
Yeah, what do you got for us?
Under. That's it. He got hit by his 1. Let's keep Jett healthy. He doesn't need to get hit by pitches. That's a big league team problem, not a minor league problem.
I'll take the push once again. I got to make up some ground. I just need just 1 time. Yeah. 1 more time for Jett Williams. That is our edition.
We now know how Connor feels about Jett Williams. He just wants him hit by fastballs.
Just brush the jersey. One of those that just scrapes the jersey and sprint to first base. All right, let's get into our mailbag questions. Obviously, a lot of excitement with the hiring of David Stearns, so we can revisit that. And I thought this was a really interesting one, Joe, that I know you'll love from Joseph. It's widely regarded that Stearns didn't have strong draft results in Milwaukee. How do you think the Mets scouting department will help there? We obviously know the Mets have a lot of continuity in their scouting department with this organization.
And we'll obviously see if David Stearns wants to make any changes to that department. But where the Mets stand now, they're a really strong drafting team. So the department led by Tommy Tanis and Drew Toussaint right now at the top, I would just let them keep doing what they do.
Right.
Like, if I were David Stearns, that's what I would do. I would say, you guys have drafted well, because, look, even if Milwaukee's drafts haven't been fantastic, they obviously have some hits because they're a playoff team.
Yeah.
Playoff team win it year in and year out that doesn't rely on big free agency. So naturally there is some player development and drafting there. But I would let the Mets scouting department stay as is. I'd say, you guys keep doing your thing, draft away, and I'll worry about everything around it.
All right, so in the theme of David Stearns, and I promise we have a non-David Stearns question, but this one from Paul, what area of baseball ops do you think Stearns will make the biggest impact in?
I think it's going to be the overall trading and assessing of value for finding the underappreciated assets, because that's really what it's about. We talked about the Taijuan Walker contract for a couple of years here, and that was finding that guy that you see something that other teams maybe aren't seeing or not appreciating enough. We saw with Tommy Pham this year, someone the Mets had their eye on, signed to a year, $6 million. He outperformed that, and obviously he would have been a key cog if the Mets were winning, but he got them a prospect in exchange. And like I said at the top of the show, David Stearns is known as like a master chess player. So you put him head-to-head with someone, he's very competitive in those markets, and more often than not, because obviously no one ever bats 1,000. No executive can. You're going to have misses. Even Andrew Friedman and the Dodgers, he's traded like O'Neill Cruz for like a rental reliever. So like there's been their own share of mistakes and errors, but it's about recognizing that and finding a way to not repeat that. So yeah, I think David Stearns will help in those two categories mostly.
So this one from Brandon Gross on YouTube, who asks, watching the show live, thank you, Brandon.
Thank you.
Could the Jazz Chisholm for Zac Gallen trade be a blueprint for a Mets offseason move? And I think what Brandon is trying to say here is,
are we trading a Jazz Chisholm or are we trading a Zac Gallen? Do we have a Zac Gallen?
The Mets need pitching. Right, yeah. That's a really good point. That's, to be fair, which side are we on? It feels like, though, with the depth of the system, could they use that to their advantage to maybe acquire pitching? Because let's be real. Look at the rotation next year. You're excited about Senga. We say it all the time. We're excited about Quintana.
Yeah.
We're big fans of Quintana on this show. Fingers crossed, can you get a Yamamoto, right?
Sure.
That's 3 arms you feel really good about. But you're not done there. You're simply just not going to throw away the 4 or 5. And we always say it, the 6, 7, 8 spots are really important. So I think that's where Brandon's going with that one.
I do think, I don't know about something so specific like you said. Like, I don't know who's our Jazz Chisholm exactly. So I don't.
Acuna? I wouldn't want to trade him.
Yeah, I kind of want to keep him. I'm excited to have Luisangel Acuna now. But I think the trade market is certainly going to be something that's investigated. Like you said, Connor, they need to add at least another couple of arms. And if they add Yamamoto, and like I said before, maybe Senga needs to stay on the kind of schedule he is, you might need 3 arms for sure. And if that's the case, you're not just going to sign those arms in free agency. You're going to have to go to the trade market, and there's going to be a high end of the trade market. I think you look at Milwaukee, where he came from. Corbin Burns and Brandon Woodruff are both free agents after next season, and Milwaukee probably is not going to pay. Definitely not both of them.
Definitely not both. Maybe neither.
Maybe neither of them. So you would think they would at least look to move one of them, and maybe David Stearns has it in. Mark Arnold, the now general manager of the Brewers, obviously is a protege of David Stearns, so maybe there's a connection there. And there's always pitchers that become available, and you also want to find, again, we'll go back to that mid guy, like the mid type of guy that's not going to cost you a top-level prospect, but you can, maximize him here with the systems that the Mets are building.
All right, so this is another question from YouTube from Jay Laveman, who said, is Wander Suarez, is it Wander or Joander?
Oh, Joander Suarez,
Joander Suarez, a legitimate prospect. I haven't seen him ranked on any prospect list, but he's been impressive in Double-A. His numbers come up once in a while on my Twitter feed of just what he's doing in Double-A, but I'm with Jay Laveman here. Joe, I've really seen nothing of him as a legitimate prospect. So you're the perfect person to break this one down.
He threw a no-hitter last week, I think. 7-inning no-hitter, but still counts.
I was going to say, it wasn't 9, but yeah.
But he still threw 7 innings of no-hit ball, which obviously was impressive. But Joander Suarez used to be a top 30 prospect in the Mets system, underwent Tommy John surgery, took a little longer than average to come back from it, and now he's back and he's pitching really well. So it's not massive stuff. Like, he's more 92 to 93. He'll touch 95 sometimes. But look, performance in the upper minors is something that always warrants watching, especially when you're talking about a team like the Mets that lack that pitching depth. And I'm certainly not saying that Joander Suarez is like a future back-end starter, but look, that's the point of the pitching lab. That's the point of this new player development staff, is take these guys that maybe we're not paying enough attention to and turn them into something. That's the whole objective of everything this organization is trying to do. And Suarez is someone that I'm certainly going to keep my eye on as we head into 2024.
Joe, I would take an 8th starter, a guy that can get through a clean 6th inning. My bar is very, very low here. So Joander Suarez is anything. Sign me up. All right, this one from our longtime listener of the show, Steve Miller, who always comes up with the most creative questions. He said, if you could go back and watch a previous Mets player's season, who would you pick? Doc in 85 would be the easy number 1, so what's number 2? I agree. Doc in 85, I wasn't alive for that season. That would definitely be that one for me. So Steve's 4 options for the number 2. Tom Seaver in 1973, Darryl Strawberry in 1988, Mike Piazza in 2000, or David Wright in 2007.
So I don't need to go back to watch something I actually watched.
That's how I felt about the last two.
So, like, Piazza and David Wright, as great as those seasons were, and sure, it'd be fun to relive them. I lived them. Yeah. So I think
it's great the first time around.
Yeah, so I think I could go without that. If I'm going to be honest with you, I have no earthly idea what Tom Seaver did in 1973 and Darryl Strawberry in 88. I'm going to go on a limb that Steve Miller looked this up, and they were awesome that year. Tom Seaver was one of the first near, like, unanimous Hall of Famers, and obviously he has a statue right outside the building we're sitting in. So I would say I'd rather see Tom Seaver's year. I saw Darryl Strawberry play as a Yankee when I was a little kid at Yankee Stadium. So I've seen Darryl before. I've obviously never seen Tom. So if you told me I could go back and watch a Tom Seaver start in a prime year of his, I would do that.
So Strawberry in 88, he had 39 home runs, over 100 RBIs. His OPS was at 911. Ironically, the year before that, and mind you, he played over 150 games both these seasons. In 87, Strawberry had a 981 OPS. So when you look back at the 80s, and he also hit 39 home runs that year. So I feel like just Strawberry from 86 to 88, you could really kind of flip a coin and take whatever season you want. But I think for me it would be Seaver, because it's, like you hinted at, Joe, it's the one we're the most far removed from. Like, just honestly to see how different baseball was as a whole, too. You don't have anybody pulling out a card in the outfield, learning where they have to stand.
There's no pitch on the break.
There's no strike zone on the broadcast. It's just, exactly. There's no pitch com breaking down every 5 seconds. God, it feels like I forget what baseball is like without the pitch clock at this point as well. So for me, I would go with Seaver in 73. That was a good one from Steve Miller. All right, let's get into... I think we do one more question, and like I said, they're David Stearns related. I wanted to get back to, because we never truly answered it from Condi, how Stearns is reportedly interested in power and pitching. We talked about Pete Alonso, but Condi's question was, how do you add to the lineup for power and pitching? We've talked about the trade market might make sense for pitching. We've talked about Yamamoto. Finding power, Joe, in trades and free agency is not easy to do.
It is not a strong offensive free agent class. So, and you also have to look, too, like, the Mets are going to ultimately return a lot of players that are currently here in the lineup. I don't think this is a lineup that's going to get overhauled. Like, catcher, you're set.
Alvarez.
First base, you're good. Second base, whether it's Mauricio or McNeil, you're good. Lindor at short, you're good. Brandon Nimmo's an outfielder. As long as Starling Marte can play, Starling Marte is one of the starting outfielders. He's under contract for significant money. Like, he's going to be relied on as someone that's going to be a starter. But when you look at free agency, like Teoscar Hernandez is out there, who's someone who has some power. I think you'd probably more realistically have to look to the trade market, assuming Shohei Ohtani's off the table as a designated hitter. But
that's your layup answer.
That's one thing.
A little tougher, though.
That's one thing I would like to see the Mets do is designated hitter. I'd like to see it become more of a priority this offseason. I think since it's been instituted to the National League, the Mets haven't exactly handled it the way I would. They've tried to platoon it, as I like to say. And
the famous platoon of Daniel Vogelbach.
And Darren Ruff for a minute.
Darren Ruff for 3 days now.
But, like, I think they need a genuine, everyday designated hitter that is their DH. And obviously, like I said, not the strongest market to sign players like that. But the trade market is always going to be flush with hitters. There's always small market teams that want to trade off some money. And, hey, I don't know if I would do it. I think in our group text we talked about it with our producer Jeff, and we weren't necessarily on board with it. Mike Trout might be available this offseason. So if he is, that's certainly something that, at bare minimum, the Mets have to do the due diligence of calling. Like, how much money are you willing to eat?
That's the biggest question around Trout.
Or what's the return look like? So that certainly is something that, maybe keep in the back of your mind.
All right, that's it for us here from the Cadillac Club. This is the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Elevate your style in a Cadillac. Go from bold to bolder in an SUV. From inspiring to awe-inspiring in a sedan, visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. And remember to subscribe to the show at Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Of course, you could watch us on SNY's YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts.